Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today we've got some news coming out as Jacksonville has released two players, those being wide receiver Zay Jones and kicker Joey Slye. So I'm going to talk to you about these, give you my thoughts. Like, do I think these are good decisions for Jacksonville? I think there's definitely much more of a conversation around one than maybe the other, but we're going to talk about really like the in-depth stuff, salary cap, and really if that should matter, because I think there is a lot of debate right now about whether this actually was something Jacksonville should have done, because you got all this money that you could spend, right? And you have Zay Jones under contract. He's a good wide receiver 4 on the team, so why get rid of a player that can have some sort of impact or at least provide a really good insurance policy? So I'm going to give you my thoughts on that. So let's go ahead and hop into it. We'll start talking about the salary cap implications of this. So the way that Jacksonville did this, it was a pre-June 1st cut for Zay Jones, and I believe the same for Joey Slye. It doesn't really have much of an impact there. For Joey Slye's contract, there was only $25,000 guaranteed. He never took a snap. He never did really anything except, I think, participate in like a couple weeks of the off-season OTAs. And so he gets paid $25,000 to do that. It's money, right? But it's absolutely nothing in terms of the actual like full-on salary cap, which is pretty much infinitely larger. So it's essentially a wash with Joey Slye. You don't really lose anything there. You brought him in to try to lock down the position in case you couldn't draft someone. Jacksonville was in a position to get someone. They get Cam Little, and I think it was a great pick. And we'll probably talk about that a little more this offseason, I'm sure, but I think he's a good kicker. He's a young kicker. He's going to get better. And as much as the kicker position's hard to nail, I feel just as confident in him, and in fact, probably more confident than I would have in Joey Slye. So a little bit cheaper, young guy, you can keep around for a long time. You know, doesn't have any blemishes on his record, whereas with Slye, there's a reason why he's bounced around a little bit. So I'm fine with that move, got no problems with it. Nothing really say other than that. But the Zay Jones move is the one that we got to talk about, right? Because this is the one that has salary cap implications. Now, as far as like the actual full-on numbers, I'll actually go to my page and give you guys the actual numbers. I wrote these down earlier. It is this season is wrong one. Here we go. There we go. So they will save over the next two seasons $4.18 million in 2024 and $3.55 million in 2025. The total of this move is saving them $7.73 million. So it comes in just shy of $8 million. His contract, the way it was set up, was that he was going to get paid $24 million over 3 years, which was $8 million a year. He was coming in just under that this season as far as the cap charge. So at the end of the day, like when we're talking about this, and I want to clarify these things when we're talking about cuts, because I find so often when there's a player cut in Jacksonville and that cap that you save is over two separate seasons, people do not understand that this is not a move about, okay, is Zay Jones worth saving $4 million this year? That is not the only question involved. The question is if Zay Jones is worth that $8 million figure, because that is the amount of cash that he is getting paid to play this year. As far as how they charge against the cap, it is over 2 seasons is the way it is working out. So that is the reality as far as the Zay Jones contract, and this has gone for plenty of other things when we're talking about cuts. So it's not, okay, is he worth $4 million? It's, is he worth $8 million? And to me, we're talking about a guy who is now wide receiver 4, clearly does not have a starting role on the team unless you are going to sit a $13 million a year player, or you're going to sit your first round rookie, which I can't imagine them doing that or have ever really having considered that as a legit option. It just didn't make sense to pay $8 million for a backup wide receiver 4. And I get that there's value in that. And I absolutely agree with people when they say, we need to have a backup. We need to have a plan, right? That is completely fine. Now, if Zay Jones was willing to say, hey, you know, I want to stick around, I'll take $4 million a year, and that'll be my contract this season. That's a whole different story, right? And I think if that was the situation, you probably take that deal because then he's worth it. But you have to think about these things like if I have this year, let's just take this year for example. I have $255.4 million that I am spending. The way that you compete, the way that you set yourself above average compared to the rest of the league is that you get more value than you're supposed to out of your money. You get more bang for your buck. Having Zay Jones on this team, even if you have an injury take place to another player that forces him on the field, which you lose value from that said player who is now not playing for you, is Zay Jones starting in that situation for this entire year worth $8 million? I think in the absolute best case scenario that Zay Jones breaks even as far as value goes at $8 million. So when you make moves like that, you have to think about it like, if I made all my decisions in this way, what is my team going to be? And so the answer is that when you spend your money that way, your team is going to be below average to at most average, because the ceiling to me with how Zay Jones would have played this year, even if he was starting, was going to be worth that $8 million contract. I didn't think it'd be any more. I thought it could definitely be less, given that he was hurt last year, did not have a good season. He had some really bad games. The worst one definitely being against Kansas City. Had multiple touchdowns that he could not get his feet in bounds for. And I'm not saying all these things as if Zay Jones never did anything good for Jacksonville. He was a great receiver his first year here, and he did start off the beginning of the 2023 season with a good game. But injuries killed him, and then he had off-the-field stuff, wasn't as big as we thought, may not really have been anything, but there was just a lot going on, and he was not productive. You've got two more players coming in alongside Christian Kirk that have to be starters for this team. I just could not see a scenario in my mind where it would make sense to keep Zay Jones. And here's the thing. Even if you have all this cap space, because right now you have $34 million, you had about $30 million before this move. Even with all that cap space, is it worth it to keep Zay Jones? Does it make it okay when you have money to spend it? My answer is no. Like, here's the thing. Just because you have, let's give a real life example. If I have $3,000 in the bank, just because I could technically afford, you know, maybe let's say I can afford to eat out at a place that costs twice as much, right? And there's no benefit to it at all for me. But I can just pay that much just because I have the money to afford that does not mean I make that financial decision, because that would be a poor decision. Because I may want that money later for something that is worth more for me. Hopefully that's an example that makes any sense, but you generally get the point. Just because you have the money does not make it okay to spend it on something that is not worth the squeeze. I just don't think that this was ever going to be a logical thing for Jacksonville to do unless the number went down. And so now, like, there is a legit question about what does the wide receiver core look like behind the three starters? And I understand that. And it doesn't mean that this is something that is not going to go addressed and they're just screwed, right? Can't make any decisions. We cut Zay Jones. This is what it is. There are things Jacksonville can do if they want to. They can try to find a player maybe to trade for. They could find someone that's still available in free agency if they want. There are different decisions they can make. I do think that while there is some risk associated with it, that if you go into this next season, let's just talk about a couple players that might be backups. One is Parker Washington, who I think is absolutely a feasible option to be your backup in the slot. I think that's fine. Talking about the outside, if Devin Duvernay has to play wide receiver, he can do it. It's not ideal, right? But you can have him out there. And behind that, you have Tim Jones, who is not a great starter, but he's an okay backup. And so you probably want to add someone in there. There is one player that Jacksonville brought in as a UDFA. I know that a few of us really liked him before the process. To me, he was an early day 3 selection, and that's Joshua Cephas from UTSA, one of the Roadrunners players. I thought he was a good player. Like, I thought this guy, probably at his ceiling, is an average starter, but he could probably get out on the field and be all right at the start. Like, he was fine on film. I liked what he did. He's a big receiver. He can be that X to fill in. And if you're talking about what you're missing, if you lose Brian Thomas Jr., or if you're losing Gabe Davis, you're losing an X receiver, because that's what they both are right now. But just looking at some things on Joshua Cephas, so you guys get an idea of like how productive he's been, how he's played. He's been a pretty good receiver. Ended up putting up over 1,000 yards, grades out really well on PFF. His film is good as well. I did have him on my big board, and he was around 110 to 120. In fact, he was higher than many of the draft picks that Jacksonville made. So do I think this guy can make the roster? I would actually bet on it right now. Unless he just has a terrible like preseason process or bombs rookie minicamp or something wild happens like that, I think this guy's making the team. I think he's a fine backup. Now, if you are not comfortable with that, I completely understand. And we can go out and we could try to look for another receiver. That is an option that Jacksonville could make. Jarvis Landry, isn't there a name to throw out? Honestly, I'm not sure if he's someone who would fit the outside role. We'll actually take a look at that really quick and just kind of look at his snap counts throughout his career. There we go. He did not play in 2023. That's one of the things to note about him. He is more of a slot receiver, was in 2022. 2021, played a little more outside, so can he do it? Sure. You can see he's a little undersized. He is 31 years old. He's an older guy. So there's questions about how good of a backup he is. But my point is, for what a backup is, I think they have options. And you also consider the fact that if this happens, say, before the trade deadline, which I believe was moved back to week 10 this year, Jacksonville can make a trade with the team. They can go make a move. They can get another player. So there should be ways to address this. I think the only way that you're screwed at wide receiver as far as backups go is if the guys you have disappoint you and you have an injury to one of your outside receivers after week 10. Because if it's a slot guy going down, if it's Christian Kirk going down, you have a backup on this roster you feel comfortable in Parker Washington that should be here this season. And if he's not, I will be shocked by that. But, you know, it's possible. He was a 6th round pick, I believe, so he's not guaranteed a roster spot necessarily, but I think he deserves one. I think he's going to earn it again. But I think you've got an option there. I think it's a very specific situation where you're screwed. And if you're talking about where to allocate your resources, the bigger issue to me would be the fact that there is no pass rush depth on this team. Unless you count Travis Gibson, who had one really good year a long time ago, and then some really good preseasons recently. I'll at least give him credit for that. Or talk about Miles Cole, who has never been productive, but has really long arms and cool metrics. If you think that's good enough, it's probably not. And I don't think anyone does, to be honest. But if I'm looking at where this roster needs additions, the way I'm thinking about it is we take this Zay Jones money, we take this $8 million over these seasons, and we put it into a pass rusher. We add someone on this team. I could give you the cliche answer of let's bring back Calais Campbell. I think it's fine. I think that would be a good move. There's other things the team could do as well. They could invest in Bud Dupree. They could go trade for someone. I know Trey Hendrickson is now available. Now, I think you would need to extend him, and then you got to get into a long-term contract. So that could maybe be an issue, or maybe you sign a big one-year deal with him. But I know he wants security, and that's probably someone you have to bring in for the long haul if you're going to make that move. But there's other options potentially out there too. So to me, when I'm talking about the Zay Jones move, I like it. You know, I hope he lands somewhere. I hope he has a starting role this season, and I think he can do that for a team. I just don't think at $8 million it makes much sense, especially in Jacksonville as a backup wide receiver. I just never thought that was going to make sense for us. And the best case scenario for him to be worth that contract is you need an injury, which you're never going to root for, and that is never going to be a good situation. And you need him to play at his absolute best to be worth that $8 million. So is that move worth it? No, it's not to me. And now you have that money that you can go reinvest into another player. I would expect Jacksonville to spend some of this cap space. I don't know if they have to necessarily. I was trying to do research into how cap rollover works. And essentially the way it is that it's over a 4-year period where if the team has not spent 89% of its cash income, which is basically the salary cap they're given every year, minus the rollover, all that combined, 89% of that over 4-year periods, if they spend that, they can roll over as much as they have available every year. So I believe Jacksonville can actually roll over this entire number in the next year, which would be really nice. It's a lot of money. You'll have roughly $70 million in 2025. You have these 5th-year options on for Trevor Lawrence, for Travis Etienne, and you can work on bringing back some of these players and still be able to spend a little bit. So there's options for Jacksonville. And so for me, like, I think the way they've done things, they're all in on this year. They have invested in a lot of players. They are trying to compete in 2024. And I think if they're going to go all in, they need to make sure that this roster is ready to go all in and they don't have a fatal flaw. Because if you have Josh Allen or Trayvon Walker go down, all of a sudden this thing is coming off the rails. Because now you got Travis Gibson going out there full-time, or it's Miles Cole full-time, and those are not good options to have on the field full-time. I don't even right now honestly want them, either of them that is, to be the third rotational piece. You bring in a guy to be number 3, then it looks a lot better. That's what I would be doing. So I'd like to see Jacksonville reinvest this money, potentially look into maybe adding another backup receiver. I do think it would be fine enough if maybe a Joshua Cephas makes the roster. I think he's a good enough player to be an adequate backup on the outside. But we'll have to see what happens. But, ultimately, to summarize this, I'm a fan of the move. I think it was the right decision. At the end of the day, the question is always going to be, was Zay Jones as a backup, as the wide receiver 4, worth that $8 million figure for this season? And I think the answer, at least to me, is very clearly no. So wish him the best. Hope he starts somewhere else, figures something out. He has a little bit of time before the season. So that's what I've got for you guys. I appreciate you joining. Thought we definitely needed to cover this. For some reason, it only hit me a couple hours after the news came out when I was leaving work. I was like, hey, I might actually need to talk about this, since it's big news. So that's all I got. But I appreciate you guys joining. I hope you have a great rest of your day. We got a lot of content coming up here. We'll have some scouting for the next draft class over the summer. I'm working on that right now. We're going to have profiles on all the prospects that were brought in to the Jaguars in the 2024 NFL draft. And then we'll do some deep dives. We'll talk about, how's Trent Baalke done? Is he going to be someone who can bring a Super Bowl to Jacksonville? Looking at the salary cap situation, all those things. I have a lot of content planned for you guys over the dead period that usually is the summer. So hopefully we'll keep things relevant. But thank you all for joining. I hope you have a great rest of your day. If you got any suggestions, let me know. But finally, go Jags.